Okay, and looks like we are live, Seth. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Absolute AppSec. This is episode 20. Once again, I didn't remember to mute that, so I'm hearing myself echo.
Yeah, welcome back, episode 20. Ken still hasn't learned, so we're going to keep doing this until he does. That's the whole plan, right?
This is what happens when we have 2 weeks off. I just forget how to do this stuff. So, which yes, we did have last week. We missed. Oh, and I'm sorry. So I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter. Seth Law, my co-host.
Everybody at Seth Law on Twitter. I mean, if you follow one of us, you probably see both of us. So.
Yeah. So so we missed last week. We didn't have a show last week. We had stuff going on. So, and this week we're gonna have 2 episodes. So we're gonna have one. We're gonna talk a little bit about some updates and just general stuff going on. And then on Thursday we're going to have Alex Smolin on the podcast. And so I'm really excited about that. I know Seth is as well. So
yeah, it should be fun. Alex will have a lot of good stuff to talk about. I mean, he's one of those that we've both, I think, followed for a number of years. So I don't think I've actually ever talked to him like face to face, I guess, or, virtually before outside of the social media platforms.
Yeah, I've seen him at a couple. He and I have talked at a couple conferences pretty quickly. AppSec USA and then LocoMocoSec, which actually I should point out, he worked with Neil, and who was on the show not so long ago, and Justin, who was on the show while I was at LocoMocoSec, President Beef. So he worked with them at Twitter. I think he was like the lead of product security or something along those lines there.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, it'll be good to catch up and see what he's been working on lately. I know he's got a ton of projects that he works through, and I mean, he's in the industry like all of us, so I'm sure we'll have a few things to talk about. We may be able to fill an hour, maybe, right? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to go by quick. It always does.
Yeah. Speaking of LocoMocoSec, I saw that they already opened registration. Was it registration, or was it just like the hotel for it for next year?
I think they did the registration and CFP so that you could I don't know if they have the hotel block. I actually don't.
They did have the hotel block. I did see that. But it looks like, yeah, CFP's up, call for presentations. And I don't even know if registration is on there, but I know they were talking quite a bit about it. I mean, that's very early to start a CFP, considering most conferences just do it a few months before. But I guess everybody wants to go to Hawaii, and maybe we'll plan their year around it. So,
yeah, I'll be planning my year around it. I mean, it was first of all, the caliber of the talks were amazing. The location was obviously pretty great. So good and also like, the hallway con type stuff, that was pretty good. But yeah, I was thinking about it, and I know like for like a Black Hat, for their call for training, I think it's like, because I remember one year I was going to submit, and then so I think it was for Black Hat in August, and I think that it was like September or October that I was like, I think I'm going to submit this year to do training at Black Hat. I went to do it, and training was already closed, so it's like that far out. So I don't know. I think if you're going to put on a quality conference, sometimes that's necessary,
Yeah, for especially to get the people that you want, right? Or like if you want to be one of those kind of industry cons that everybody goes to, it makes sense because you want those big names to put themselves on that calendar so everybody can see you there, or can see them there. So
yeah, I mean, plus if you're going to attend, like, you need to make plans on that. It's better to be able to do it farther out, like you said, because it's, even if you're just attending, it's obviously not like hey, I live in LA and I'm going to go to Seattle or something, right? You're talking about, I think well, shit, I think it was like an 8-hour flight from Denver or something like that,
Mhm.
like from Denver. So I think but weirdly enough, I think it was like a 9 or 10 hour flight coming back directly from Honolulu. But it's like a good, it's a good bit of time you're going to spend getting out there. So it's not a small leg of travel.
Yeah. And just to pitch them too, right? If you go to their site, all of the like talks from last year are up and they're pretty good. Right? If you're interested in the content itself, they're just releasing all the talks online. So, if you don't have anything else to listen to, if we happen to be off one week, go listen to some Locomocosec talks, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we happen to be, it's going to happen. We have lives, we have things going on.
Yes, we do. And as usual, you can interact with us during the show on the YouTube chat using the YouTube chat function or via our Slack channel. If you want to join our Slack channel, hit the website on absoluteappsec.com, and there's an invitation link right there that you can follow to log in.
Yeah, with more people joining, we've had some pretty good conversations in there, and they've led to some good topic ideas, and so it's like kind of a little community that's starting to blossom out of that. So you can sign up on our, like Seth was talking about, you can sign up on our website, absoluteappsec.com.
Yeah, and I mean that kind of brings us to the topic itself. I guess we've talked about Alex coming on Thursday. We're doing a couple of them. You're supposed to tell us what's happening with stickers and buttons. Did you start sending those out, Ken?
Okay, well, I put that on the thing to talk about because I thought I was going to get it done. I didn't. So, no, because okay, so long, let me condense this down. I hate mail and physical mail specifically. Although I don't mind getting it from Amazon, but whatever. Like the process of mailing out, I just, to go to the like USPS and interact with the people there. Yeah. Anyways, so my wife volunteered to help me out with this, and then I didn't get her any of the information I was supposed to. So that should still happen though this week. I know I keep saying that, and also like the other thing I wanted to get done and didn't get done because last week I was busy. The survey regarding bug bounty stuff. So like I know, hopefully by next or even Thursday, maybe I can make an announcement saying I actually did these things, but probably only the mail thing will happen where I'm mailing out the buttons and stickers. If you want buttons and stickers though, to eventually someday reach you, I don't know when, then send your name and address to absoluteappsec at gmail.com.
Do that. The other thing we could do is just dox you and have them come to your house, right, to pick it up.
There you go. Yeah, sure. Why not?
Sure, why not?
Can't wait to get swatted.
Yeah, exactly. So Ken's physical address is. Okay.
Yeah. Well, the people that do get the buttons and stickers probably will have my address. So, yeah.
Good point. So if you want to dox him later, you can do that too, right? There's an advantage here to signing up. I guess if you're West Coast, I could send you stickers from here, and I'll put a fake address on there for you. So, cool. So the topic that we went on, there was a good couple hour conversation on it on the Slack channel this week, had to do with authentication, right? And I can't remember how it initially came about. I was looking back through the Slack history to figure out what actually happened and what spurred the discussion, right?
Yeah, I know it bounced around because it started with like, because I know it bounced around from like JWT versus, was it JWT versus cookies, or was it JWE and JWS? Wait. Yeah, I'm just looking back. Yeah, there was some bit of bouncing around here. So yeah, so Jason was
I
talking
mean,
about JW.
I think me and Jason were talking about JWTs and JWEs. Like I've been working on some assessments, or I've been seeing quite a few assessments and quite a few like mobile apps that use, uh, basically it's just JavaScript web tokens, right? That's for authentication. And there's typically a specific endpoint you authenticate using credentials with, and then they hand you a token that's good for so long. But that inside that token is your full identity. If you do a base 64 decode on it, there's a standard, the JWT actually the signing algorithm that was used for this token. This is how long it's valid for. This is who it is. It's typically got a lot more information in there than is necessarily, necessary, but enough that the application itself can identify you. I mean, it's typically used in a single sign-on scenario, right? Where you pull a token for a specific service from your authentication provider, and then you can pass this token around and use it as long as it's valid. For different applications or different scopes. It makes it easier so that the application itself doesn't have to handle authentication. All it has to do is pull that token apart, check the signature on it, and then say, okay, we know that you are this person because it's been validated by the authentication service. So very similar to what Kerberos or some of the authentication providers do. Right? So that's where it initially started. And my main interest there was, okay, how do you actually pull that apart, right? I mean, Ken, have you dealt with those tokens before? Have you tried to test them?
Like test the encryption?
Not necessarily the encryption, but even just some of the, like mess with them, right? Impersonate someone, enumeration attacks, anything along those lines. Have you played with it?
I think the last time I did play with it, I came to the conclusion that like we'll take JWT as an example. It was a lot like a client side cookie, if I'm not mistaken. Like it was just something that I could. I mean, you can effectively use it until it's, for whatever reason, it's expired, right? With the client, let me explain that a little bit better. With a client side cookie, for instance, even if there's an expiration set on it, like say somebody set an expiration on a client side cookie, and the browser might say like, okay, cool, I'm going to remove that client side cookie, but unless the secret that was used to sign that cookie rotates, that cookie's still valid, or unless you've done some sort of effectively a put a date inside of the signed value and then check that date on the server side. You could do something like that. And there's actually an article that kind of cracked me up, but it's super useful. Well, funny, and it's essentially, it talks about like why you shouldn't use a JWT, or why you're basically reinventing the wheel if your goal is to replace cookies, essentially. So if I can find that article, which I'm sure I will be able to, I'll post it to chat. It's got like a flow chart that says, well, if you're going to do this, then you're going to have to do this. So guess what? You've reinvented this. So let me find that. Let me Google that. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about assigned value.
Yeah, I mean, and that was just it. Like there's not as many. I mean, initially when you start talking about authentication, you feel like there are a lot of attacks against that. Like, I mean, you've got your enumeration attacks, your authentication bypasses, all that kind of stuff. A lot of the, impersonation attacks, like, hey, I'm going to try and become someone else, like through insecure direct object reference, right? It seems like when you initially look at one of those JWTs and you start base64 decoding it, it's like, oh, well, there's my username. So all I have to do is change that username, re-encode it, and then send it back up and see what happens, right? But very rarely have I actually run into an instance. Actually, I've never run into an instance where the JWT library on the server side will accept a token that's not signed properly, right? And so actually messing with some of those values doesn't necessarily do anything. It just gets you booted out of the application, just ends up in a, not authorized error, whatever else there is. So, our discussion around JWT sort of devolved from there into just, tokens in general, MFA, other authentication paths that exist, and authentication vulnerabilities. Before we step away from JWT though, there's two main attacks that I've seen that actually, or two main vulnerabilities that I see with them that I have actually seen in the wild. The first one is that the signature algorithm is specified in the JWT header, and you can, if they're not implementing it properly on the back end, and they're accepting that value from the token itself, you can change that to something like none, at which point the signature is invalid and you don't even have to provide a signature, right? And then there's more avenues there for attack. The second is exactly what you were talking about as far as expiration goes, Ken. And that's the one that I've seen most often, is that there is like an expiration value embedded in the token, but the server doesn't necessarily care. It doesn't actually check that. It just checks whether or not the signature is valid. And if it is, then it moves on.
Which is, yeah, I mean, it's the same principle as a client-side cookie at that point. I mean, yeah. I'm really not sure, and I just posted the flow chart, but it's, and to be clear, like, this is specifically what I mean, this article and my thoughts are pertaining to using JWT for sessions. Obviously, like, I mean, for instance, with I'll use GitHub as an example for interacting with the API. You can create a JWT that expires in and it is checked in a certain amount of time, and then like basically locally from your machine, you would use that to interact with the API, not like using in the sense that we think of like burp and all that stuff. Usually probably just making curl commands or something just to do something with the API. I mean, obviously that can be used in a different capacity, right? Like you can use a JWT to make calls. You could probably automate some stuff, but the point is that the expiration is checked, and it's not, I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's not for like a browser-based session that I'm talking about. So this is a different use case than when you're talking about like what I'm not, okay, so what I'm trying to say is where I think it shouldn't be used, or it doesn't make a lot of sense, or it's not exactly, it's just kind of reinventing the wheel, is when you've got, say, like a React app or an Angular app, and then the solution was, well, I want to talk to a few microservices, so let me create this JWT, and then, that's going to replace sessions, and that JWT from your browser is going to be passed to those various microservices. That's like the case that I'm talking about. And this diagram is kind of hilarious because it like talks a little bit about that. So it says, like, I think I can make JWT work for sessions by changing the signing key when a user needs to invalidate their sessions. Problem is that when you go, just like with the client-side cookie, when you rotate the key, then the mechanism for, like, if the key is not on a per user basis, then the mechanism for validating the signature that's coming to the app is now going to say every session doesn't match the key we use to sign. So everybody essentially gets logged out. All those sessions become invalidated. And it's some other stuff like that, like just storing an identifier in the token. Keeping a list of revocations accessible to my server so that I can invalidate tokens. You're blacklisting authentication on the server. Goes down. What now? So it just walks through all of the kind of the thoughts I think we all have on like trying to replace sessions with JWT. It's just not, you're just reinventing the wheel. But then again, there's other uses for JWT that are totally practical. They just have nothing to do with like your web browser and sessions.
Yeah. I mean, this is still a problem, right? I mean, you're starting to talk about it, like why this solution doesn't work, but I am seeing them used more and more exactly for this reason, right? Or exactly for this purpose. Whether it is a mobile app that's doing, that's talking to backend microservices, or a React app doing the same thing. It seems to be that a lot of people are defaulting to JWTs nowadays. just because it does give them that slight piece of information that they can pass around that's controlled by the client, but then they don't think through all the different security aspects of that when they do try to revoke tokens or regenerated keys, what have you. Right?
Yeah, and I think so I posted an article on there, reposted. It was originally posted by somebody in our Slack chat, but I'm scrolling to, so it was Jason White, who is going to be on the podcast, by the way, on July 17th, I think. Yeah. Anyways, at the same time that we're talking about JWT, this article by James Kettle at Portswigger brings up some, good points about the fact that local storage and session storage versus cookies. Well, cookies have these various flags like secure flag, path attribute, HTTP only flag, which are just trying to mask the design problem that we have with cookies. Like the fact that you need a secure flag, well, it just shouldn't be necessary. If you're making a call to HTTP and your cookie was set for, HTTPS, right? But it's just a design thing, which they do reference in that article, by the way. I think this is funny because I'm in the process of rereading for the billionth time. Not that any of it will sink in, or I just hope some percentage, but I'm in the process of rereading the Tango Web, which this article points to. It's such a good reference for web standards and how they're all fucked up. But this article is a pretty good breakdown of how cookie mechanisms are insecure. So
yeah, which brings us to the wider discussion on authentication, right? That what we're trying to do here is identify who someone is before we give them access to resources. So JWT is one way that's handled. Person logs in, username, password, gets the token, and then they pass that around to whatever resource they want to access. But there's multiple different mechanisms that people use for authentication, right? You can start talking about multi-factor authentication, right? MFA, which led to an interesting discussion around MFA and strong authentication, as it was called a couple of years ago. Do you remember this back in, I'm going to date myself. This had to have been early 2000s. All the banks switched over to what they called strong authentication. They would show you an image, right, when you tried to log in. Do you remember that at all?
Yeah, so you got your username, password, and then on the next one, they're like, did you choose the owl? Is this you?
Well, they would show you an owl, and then they would show you a phrase, right? Okay, so I was at a bank at the time, right? I was working for a local bank on their security team, and this was a direct result of the IEC pushing out regulations that said, and that was their wording, that banks that employed online banking had to use strong authentication to identify users, right? So at the time, there was a company that was called Passport. That was the technology behind that image and that phrase that they would present to you. The thing is it really didn't actually provide you any additional security around your credentials, right? You still had to put in your username and password. It could be argued that it made it less secure because the banks had to introduce this new component into their authentication flow that allowed for easy user enumeration, because normally you'd put in your username first, then it would show you an image and a phrase, and only then would you put in your password. It's really hard to figure out as the bank, and when someone puts in a username, if in fact that is the person itself, before showing them an image. So you authenticate users, or you authenticate their existence pretty easily, right? So you allow enumeration. But then on the other hand, it's not necessarily something that right? If I'm an attacker, I don't necessarily care what image or phrase pops up. I just know, hey, there's another place for me to put in a password. So I can just shove that into the next form field and move on. It doesn't actually make the security any higher. And so there was this argument that went back and forth, at least for me when I was at the bank, like the security team. They're like, well, we have to do this per federal regulations. We've got to implement strong authentication. This is the way the industry is going. I mean, you saw everybody from B of A to Wells to Citibank, they all implemented this solution. And really what it came down to is it was authentication, but it was authenticating the bank to you, not the reverse way, right? So if the user wasn't checking to see whether or not that image was proper, so there was a little bit of security that it introduced, but it wasn't authentication in the traditional sense of I'm trying to prove my identity to the bank before I actually access my account. It was the bank authenticating themselves, their identity to you, right?
So they made authenticating a more difficult process by challenging. The mindset was we're going to challenge the identity of the user by them choosing the correct image and passphrase. But in reality, it was supposed to be that, if the bank's showing you this image and, if they're showing, well, the passphrase could be bullshit because that as an attacker site, you just, you put in a passphrase, cool. Right. But like, if you're not showing the passphrase, right? So, so the idea was that the user was supposed to, interesting. Like, I didn't actually know the history behind that. I did have one question. You had said that it made enumeration easier. I think you said that. Is that what you said, for enumeration easier, or it made enumeration easier when they showed the image?
It did. Like initially, like if you think about logging on to a bank, right, or any like online service, you put in their username and password, and if either of those is invalid, you just get back a generic error message. And that's what we had at the bank at the time. But we introduced this new technology, and the only thing that we had to get, the only piece of information that an attacker had to put in on the login page was the username, and then they would be displayed an image, right? And that image only showed up if the username was valid, right? The way the technology came out of the box. And right. And then we had timing issues as well, because you've got hundreds or millions of accounts that it has to search through to actually see if it's valid. So they'd put in a username and we could show them a random image, but you also had to be careful because the random image, they would, if they tried it twice and a different image showed up 2 times, it still meant that it was an invalid account, right? It was a constant back and forth to figure out how to structure the application to use this technology. It was almost like we had to ask for a username and password and then show them the image versus how it was done in the past.
That's pretty interesting, because I had no idea the history. So what's funny is I had actually written up a finding before, and I remember this was like 2000. I won't say the name of the company, but it's like a big. They've got a bunch of people's data, and anyways, so and you know who I'm talking about when I say that, but I'd written up a finding like this for them, and that was a suggestion. I'm like, well, just randomly show an image, like just choose an image from like a random array or whatever of available images, and then you've got your problem solved. And it never got fixed, and that makes more sense if they're just using an out of the box technology. That's interesting. I just didn't know that was the reason they were using some out of the box technology that didn't come with that functionality. That's if the user didn't exist. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was just embedded. It was, so you introduced it into your flow. Actually, RSA eventually acquired Passport because they were making all these sales to, big banks, to their portfolio. But you've seen people go away from it now, right? Since it isn't true. And the banks were very careful not to call it multi-factor or 2-factor authentication, because it wasn't. It was only authenticating the bank to the consumer, but no consumer would realize that was what was actually happening, right? Most consumers are probably going to go to the website anyway before they put in their username and password. They're not just going to go willy-nilly put it into random places. But I guess at the time, that people were more apt to just click on links and allow their credentials to be phished. I guess you could argue that still happens all the time, but yeah.
I'm pretty sure Verizon Fios login still does that shit.
Really? Still uses an image like that? I mean, I'm sure there's still a lot of services that do, but you have seen the banks move away from it as they have introduced more realistic 2FA or MFA solutions, whether that's, token based ones via email or SMS, or even, full on one-time tokens out of your, smartphone, like using Google Authenticator or whatever else. So it was all just a cost. How much does this actually cost to roll out? We can buy this simple solution, put it into there, and then we comply with FFIEC regulations, so we can move on, right? Anyway,
I see we got a shout out from Iraq, Samuel Glasser.
Oh, sweet.
Interesting. Cool. Let's see. Yeah, Jason said most pointless security control ever, those images. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pointless shit that we do. I mean, and then it comes down from, like you were talking about, like those regulations that get pushed down without much understanding of them. So, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the beginning of that. And then we jumped into more like MFA, right? And specifically the thing that I wanted to talk through with you, and that we kind of had an argument about, or that we talked about, was the use of tokens, right, as the only piece of authentication information. So this kind of goes into JWTs, but it's very similar to what some of the third-party authentication providers do, is allowing us to have a single token that we pass to a site in order to actually log in, right? There's no reason why we just have to stick with username and password, right? You can argue that that's even actually less secure than a 64 character or 256 character string like token value, because half of that is typically public knowledge, right? If you think about a username and password, usually it's pretty easy to guess what somebody's username is when they're logging into a site, right? So the only thing that you have to guess is a 12 or a 16 character password to log in as them. Whereas if you are using something longer that is truly random, it's going to be a lot more difficult for someone to brute force that. But that does introduce a whole host of other problems, right? What are your thoughts along those lines?
Well, I guess, because I actually don't remember too much about this conversation, so I'm kind of going off the top of my head. But my first thought is, okay, well, obviously there's got to be a device that because obviously, I mean, no user is going to remember this token, right? So there's got to be some way for them to retrieve that, which then makes me think, well, I mean, obviously you'd always think of like Google Authenticator or Duo or something like that. But then you're like, but how do you do multi-factor authentication? And is there a point, right? Like if you're already putting in a token, does that kill the need for multi-factor authentication? And I think there's value in multi-factor authentication, 100%. There's value in that. Yeah. So I guess that's my first concern, is that I would think it would effectively take away the current mechanisms we use for multi-factor auth, and then I'm wondering what would replace that.
I don't necessarily think I would do away with 2FA in this scenario. What I was thinking about was more along the lines of, hey, guess what? We use 1Password to store long tokens, long security credential tokens. So is there really a need for me to have a username associated with each of those, right? If I have a random token that I set up when I register with Facebook, right, or whatever site that I'm logging into, why can't I just use that and then use my regular 2FA or whatever, like MFA process? And doesn't that give me an added level of security as far as like what the username would be? Does it not reduce the attack surface?
Yeah, I mean, let's see, thinking through that. So the downside would be that everybody needs to use a password storage like app. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that's a downside from our perspective, but from a usability perspective, like how common is that? I don't know. Maybe this forces people to go that route. So now you've got to have see, this is where I think it gets a little dicey, because now you've got it's already an issue with just two-factor auth. Like, I mean, for instance, Kevin Cody, he lost his account, right, for 6 months because he had an issue while he was transferring between phones, his Duo stuff. So you're talking about introducing added complexity and sorry, I got distracted by Slack. Let me put my do not disturb. You're talking about added somewhat of like added complexity for the average user. I don't think it's a bad thing. See, the thing is, I don't take a hard stance either way that it's a bad thing. I just think I think there would be difficulty in getting everyone to use it, which is maybe not a bad thing because of the fact that one of our bigger problems or biggest problems is that folks use, like, forget about the username, but the password is usually something common and easy for them to remember.
Yeah.
And, this kind of.
And this would force them to go.
Right.
I mean, all of the, the services themselves. I mean, you think about like how 1Password or like LastPass works, and they've got some master key that you have to enter to actually unlock the whole thing, right? And, heaven forbid you lose that master key, because if you do, you're never getting into it again, right? And I can't imagine like how painful that would be at this point, right? As we depend on those password managers, if you were to lose something like that. So that, there's always going to be that weak point where that is the memorable thing. Jason brought up a good point that we could use, some sort of FIDO, like the YubiKey, something that, we keep with us to actually generate those or, manage those tokens. That would also be a maybe a more secure way to do that. But it's almost like we do need to retrain the users. You're right. But like, if we're retraining them, is there any reason why we couldn't go to, some sort of, hey, guess what? You trust Duo, or you trust, what are the other services that are out there that do authentication? You go log in there, you're auth 0, right? That's what it was. That's the one that Stefan brought up.
Yeah.
You use one of those services, you log in there, you just get a token, and then that's what you pass around, or that's what you use is those JWTs to log into other sites. I mean, we see a lot of users that are starting to do that anyway through the use of, Facebook credentials and Twitter credentials or Gmail or Google credentials to log into other sites and allow them to establish identity that way, rather than having yet another, username and password stored somewhere else. I don't think I'm not looking for a complete solve. It was just an interesting exercise to me to actually think about what is really necessary to identify someone.
Yeah, I know that's always an interesting, because like going even farther, when you talk about like the in the situation that you've lost the ability to do a pass for whatever reason. Let's say you use an email address that you like, because I actually did this once. I put in an email address that was one character off accidentally, and I went through like 7 levels of hell with Xbox support to get to get myself to be able to change that email address and to be able to log in again. And so that process doesn't exist everywhere. Like, there are some sites, if like you put in the wrong email address and they never had you confirm it to continue using the account, so you put in the wrong email address and you forgot your password. Now you're talking about a situation where, what do you use to identify the person, right? So,
well, and I mean, that's another common attack too, right? Like, if you look at domain expiration, right? People use vanity domains all the time, or they use their own domains for authenticating the services. If I know that you have an account with, Gmail or whatever, it's very easy for me to establish, once I take over your domain, I can become you pretty easily, right? Because they use DNS as an authentication mechanism if you've forgotten your password. Sorry, that just popped into my head because I have done that in the past. Is hey, a friend couldn't remember whatever, and they'd let their domain expire, and I was like, well, it's still available. Let's just take it back over and tell Google that we are now the account owners, and this is the new admin password, and they allow you to do that. And you can reset anybody's email once it's associated with that domain. So
interesting. Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that. When I brought it up, I was thinking of like the Google Flow where they do, I don't know, I don't remember what exact, but it's like, hey, when was the last time you think you logged in with this account?
Oh yeah.
It's just various questions that like,
what was a previous password? Yeah, that's usually one of them too, right?
Yeah, exactly. What was the previous password? Just trying to do this identity of like identifying you as a human on this large automated scale and avoid bot attacks. It's just, I mean, to me, that's, if we could ever get anyone on to just like talk through how they design something like that, I think that would be, I could sit there and listen to that for 3 hours. Like that would be interesting. So
yeah. Well, maybe it's something that we should, see if we could identify someone at one of those big companies that would be willing to come on, right? I think about it a little bit because there's, that is an interesting discussion. I mean, establishing, like we talk about, and I mean, we're going to talk about this in our course too. We haven't really plugged that, but this fall, right? You kind of talk about the 3 pillars of security, right? Your authentication, your authorization, and your auditing, or your, And authentication is huge, right? Identifying who someone is not an easy exercise, especially in an automated fashion, and especially when they do forget their credentials. So is there an easier way to handle that prevents them from forgetting the credentials, right? Because they can't remember which of their previous 10 passwords they used, or we're depending on a third-party service to do that identification for us, whether that's Facebook or something that they use often. I mean, I think we're seeing people do this through a number of different services in a number of different ways that may or may not be more secure than what the status quo is.
Yeah. Well, I'll work on. I think I know a couple people who might be able to help us out on this. So I'll work on the guest list for that, because I think that this is to be a really fun to talk about. Yeah. But on the course front, I know I don't know if we'll have time to get to it. We're going to talk about the regex stuff. But yeah, I think we can probably just push that off.
Oh yeah, we can talk about regexes a bit later.
You put the World Cup on our list to talk about.
Except, Germany lost, so I don't really want to talk about it. But I did apologize on Twitter if you happen to see errant soccer tweets. It's because the World Cup's going on, and that must be more important than security right now, right? It'd be a good time to fish people with World Cup memes or whatever, right?
Be a good time.
I don't know. I mean, you're the one that's wearing a Brazil shirt, so it's obvious that you are the World Cup fan here. So.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I think this shirt proves that I'm a fan of free T-shirts that are cool. So if anyone wants to send me free T-shirts that are cool, I'll wear them on the podcast.
Sweet. Free advertising on our failing podcast.
It's on the YouTube. You Shot the Sheriff. So I'm promoting them today because this was free and was clean.
Sweet. Free. It has to be clean? Wow. Okay, slow down.
So many requirements.
So many requirements here.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I promise I'll get my shit together and get those that stuff mailed out. What else do I feel like there's something else we owe people. I owe people. I don't know. That's the big one.
We did get the podcast has been accepted on Google Play, right? As a podcast. I don't know if it did get through to Stitcher yet. I didn't check the actual email. But I was having problems enrolling it in Apple Podcasts because I was trying to do it the week of WWDC, right? and everything was just borked at the time. So I'll go back and do that. But you can subscribe to the podcast on Google Play now, and we'll keep pushing it out to the other podcast platforms and see if we can't keep that rolling, give you other alternatives for actually listening to us, and hopefully learning something new when we talk, or just listening to us, whatever.
Well, so it is. I checked the email. It is, and I put the link in the YouTube live chat as well as Slack chat. But yeah, so it's on Stitcher. It's been approved.
Oh, good call. Oh, look, and it's even got them all in there. Sweet. My RSS feed is working. So good call. I will add that to the website as well. The fact that it is on Stitcher. So we're on Stitcher and we're on Google Play. It will be on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any others that you would like to see it hosted on, please let me know, or let us know. Log into Slack, send us an email, and we'll work on getting it out there. Now that I've figured out the format and how it actually, how that all works, it's not too bad to add it to different platforms. Cool.
So, well, I was going to.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention that we've got Alex on Thursday. I just wanted to mention that again. I think that's going to be a great episode, so please tune in. And then the following week, we're going to have Jimmy Mesta on again to answer more questions. He got bombarded the last time he was on here with Kubernetes and Docker and all kinds of great questions. Like, man, I think that was the most questions we've ever had someone get bombarded with. So get your questions ready again for serverless, Docker, Kubernetes, all that, because Jimmy is going to be on again on the 26th. And then we've got the following month, Ken Toller, Jason White. In August, we're going to have Jim Manico on the show. So we've got a good lineup starting to formulate here. So yeah, we'll be back in 2 days to do this podcast again with Alex.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for talking through authentication stuff with me today. Thanks for listening. As usual, make sure to register for the course, I guess, once it pops up, right? For our adventures with Ken and Seth in code review. So,
yeah. Can you register for that now or no?
I don't think you can. You can register to go to AppSec USA. But I don't think the course registration is up. They haven't said anything about it yet, or we haven't received an email that they're starting to promote it. But it probably will happen pretty soon because it is September, or I guess it's October timeframe. So
sweet. Yeah, I hadn't looked in a while. So cool.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody for listening, and we'll be back in 2 days.
Sweet. All right. Have a good one. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks. All right.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.